Welcome back to SiouxperCon 2020 online. To my left on my screen, there's GW himself, Garrett Walls, and to my right, Alex Pastrell, the AP. My name is
Hello,
Marvin.
everybody.
We're from the Wednesday Comics Podcast here for SiouxperCon 2020. And with us today is Ryan, Cody, and Phil Hester from Family Tree. We're going to do a little Family Tree panel today. So I actually have the first question I'm going to throw out there, so the concept of this comic, or where it goes from, especially from issue 5 to 6, it really is like very unique. And I just want to know, how does that start? Where's the genesis of this story start? Was it Jeff came to you, Phil, or Ryan, or like how did that start?
It all started with Jeff. We've been looking for a project to do together for a while, and we've had some near misses on other projects, and then finally this thing came along that he thought was just the right thing to do, and he had it pretty much fully formed in his head, except that Jeff is a very intuitive writer, so he'll let the story go where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And there'll be twists and turns along the way that he doesn't necessarily plan out. So for people that haven't read the book and don't want to be spoiled, you should probably stop listening for a little while. But,
yeah, I was gonna say I got some spoilers for later that because I just reread the last issue that came out, so that was
yeah. So, but there's the basic setup of the book is that there's this little girl who's sort of growing bark and limbs out of her skin. And you think, oh, she's got this weird disease that makes her kind of a tree person. And we slowly find out that, no, it really is turning her into a tree person. It's not bark like skin, it's bark. And she's slowly becoming a tree person. And that there seems to be this cult that's dedicated to finding people like her and killing them, especially before they can fully turn into trees. And you're like, they're presented as a crazy cult,
Yeah.
And the twist that you learn in these issues is that the cult was right. The cult was, it probably should have killed these people because once Meg actually does turn into a tree, it means the end of the world.
Yeah, which is actually that's between 5 and 6. And I think we actually, on our podcast, we reviewed issue 5 and where it makes that jump. And it was totally unexpected. You kind of and I think I feel like Jeff does this a lot, where his books, you feel like you're going to sit in a certain situation. He might actually make you feel comfortable with certain expectations of the genre. And then it's like, nope, actually this book's about this instead. Which actually might come from what you said. He doesn't really, actually that probably was planned out, but a lot of stuff that he does is let's feel it out, which I know he did for Royal City, a book that we like. There was a certain point where he was like, this book's over. I expected to write it longer, but the story says it's done now. That jump from 5 to 6, 6, where the story is now, was that always is that where all the world building is going to be starting, the first 5 or just to get there? Or are we going to go back and see more of before times?
No, I think those two, the overall theme of the book is reflected in both things. And in the first 3 main arcs, you're going to get different variations on this theme, which is that families can go through a lot and sort of stick together. And they can stick together through trauma, like in the first arc. They can stick together through the apocalypse, which is sort of the second arc. And they can stick together through the transformation of the human species into something altogether new, which is sort of the third arc. So it's sort of this you don't know what your relationships to other people mean until they're tested. And you see that reflected in sort of that with Meg's dad, Darcy. He goes through the same transformation she does, but because he's a toxic American male, he goes off to die on his own. Since Meg's a little girl, she doesn't have that choice. She has to stay with her family.
Yeah.
Darcy had stayed with his family, it's possible that his family would have seen him through this transformation and we would have had a totally different story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a lesson in, way different characters relate to their family and sticking together. So Loretta's left with this broken family that she has to hold together. And Meg's transformation is sort of central to the trauma that they're going through, but she sees them through that. And then you see that strength that she has and that she teaches to Josh sort of go through those other two huge transformations you're talking about, the end of civilization and then sort of like the end of humanity.
Meg's grandfather's transformation, I feel like, is really different, and it feels like that's like I enjoyed beginning of issue 6 when him and Darcy are talking. You can obviously tell like he's not a father that is, or at least to Darcy, like felt like he was a real father that was there for him. But when he shows them that he's changing, he's like, no, you need to protect them now. And then you kind of reflect back on that first arc being like, a lot of times when you get that kind of character that we see in the first arc, you're like, okay, that's the protective grandfather. He's always been there. That's the kind of guy that he is. But then now you're seeing that like he stepped up to be that guy, and he wasn't always that kind of person. Like you're saying, like for family, he's going to do that and put himself in that situation. So this book is very interesting to me because, so I looked everywhere, because usually when people work on a book, it's kind of like the collaborative process is like, you do this, you do this, you do this. And everywhere that you guys are credited on this book, it's just like, your names are just there. It doesn't say exactly what you do in the book. Obviously, I know Phil is like drawing the book and Jeff is writing the book, but it just says by and it has your names. So what's the collaborative process like in this book from each standpoint? Like, how does that work with all you guys together?
I'll let Ryan talk about it.
Okay, yeah. So basically, Jeff has written the scripts far in advance, and then Phil, I don't know. I just see the pages when they're done, so I don't know how far ahead Phil's drawing them. But then the inker, Eric, so Eric Gapster's our inker on the book, and I get my pages directly from Eric. So I'm kind of the second to last person to see the pages outside of our letterer and designer, Steve. So, yeah, I mean, Jeff, I assume I know he writes a full script. I read the script. So Jeff writes a full script. Phil uses that script as his jumping off point to draw it. Eric adds his flares to it when he inks it, because the pencils and the inks are, Eric adds a lot in the inks, and then my job is to color the book. And so it's pretty straightforward process. It's not something, I think it's becoming less and less common in comics today, where you actually have, four people doing 4 individual jobs like that. A lot of people ink themselves now and stuff like that. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And just to touch real quick on what Phil was talking about earlier about the arcs and all that stuff, and how you were talking about kind of the cliffhangers. What I like to do is I don't read the scripts before I get the pages. And so sometimes I'll open up the last pages of the issue for the inked, or I'll see the inked line art, in the email chain, and it'll just blow my mind. And I'm currently wrapping up issue 9, and it has 2 kind of cliffhangers, and I was like, what? And then 2 pages later, I was like, what? And it's so much fun for me, even as someone who works on the book, to not spoil myself by reading the scripts. And just, I get that cliffhanger moment too. I just get it in an email rather than wait for the printed book.
That's so like, as in a way, you're a fan of what you're working on.
Sure.
So part of that, actually, I want to talk about your colors, Ryan. I had noticed, and I don't know if this is intentional or unintentional. We actually just got done with Phil talking about being intentional with your art. And so I'm curious whether or not this was a choice, but it seems like the palette is very earthy, kind of like muted earthy colors. Was that a choice, or is that just how the book turns out?
No, it was definitely a choice. I think prior to Meg's transformation, it was more of like an urban muted look, a lot more grays and blues. Mm-hmm. And then once Meg transforms, and once we see the scenes that take place post transformation and in tree world, then they're definitely going to be more green hued. And it's just a way I try to differentiate each scene. So if a scene is in a city and it's 5 pages, it's going to be lit differently than if it's in a car a couple pages later, or if it's in like tree world, or if it's in the world after the transformation. Everything's going to have a different palette. Everything has a different kind of vibe to it. So yeah, it's very conscious. I think that's actually the most thought I put into it, is actually the palette, more than like any kind of rendering or whatever. Is I put a lot of thought into the color palette on the characters or on the scenes.
Yeah, and that's why we went and got Ryan, because in every book where I at least get to call shots about colorists, The only thing I really care about is their palette. What they think about color and color theory, and if they're willing to. I think nowadays it's sort of the modern aesthetic to let colorists carry almost all the rendering on a page. Because I grew up in black and white comics, that's like just not part of my aesthetic. Like if something doesn't work in black and white, it doesn't work in my mind. So I don't like to cede that much rendering territory to a colorist. And a lot of times a colorist's rendering is counter to the drawing. You'll see that in a lot of modern comics. So I like colorists that do the majority of the work in their color palette choices. And Ryan definitely falls in that category. We're simpatico in terms of like the whole approach we wanted to take to this book.
Actually, I do agree with that. Actually, I had a follow-up earlier when you were talking about, Ryan, that a lot of times that these days you don't see people that have 4 people in a book that colors and inks. Usually the artist is like taking on that on themselves. And to your point, Phil, like I think the rendering is where I see that, because sometimes you can see somebody's pencils, and then by the time it's rendered, it does change the mood of how exactly the pencils kind of looked. Do you think that's why a lot of artists kind of try to keep it, to themselves, or do you think it's good to have that outside perspective of Ryan? Obviously you do, because you're on this book with them, but yeah. I see a lot of times nowadays it's like they ink themselves, they color it themselves, like they do everything themselves. And I actually do like it when it is a separate person. And on the show, we actually hugely pay attention to who's the colorist on the book, because it does make a difference.
Yeah, I think part of the fun of comics is collaboration. Like it's drawing, writing, coloring, lettering. Those are all sort of like lonely jobs. So just to have a team that you can be a part of is kind of like engaging. It keeps you vital with the work. So that's definitely something I value. It also frees up my time to do other things. Rather than ink a book, I'd rather write another book. I'd rather pencil one book and write another, or pencil 2 books rather than write, pencil, and ink one book. I imagine there's some project I might want to do that way someday, but I have so many, like Ryan, I have so many friends that I owe work to, like from like 10 years ago, where you're like, we need to work together. And then like 10 years ago back, you're like, oh yeah, like we need a project. So like I have a lot of, not only just friends that I feel like I owe a collaboration to, but like friends who have something that they can bring to my work and I can bring to theirs that accentuates our stuff. And so I'm always looking for those sort of opportunities.
Yeah, like I've done that before. Most of my work prior to the last couple of years was penciling, inking, and coloring all my own stuff, doing all 3 on it. And you really do get burned out by the time you get to the coloring stage on a book like that. You get sick of looking at your own artwork. At least I do. And so if you're willing to give up the creative control of micromanaging every aspect of the book, it's super rewarding. And like our book is unique in a way that we all 4 of us, the Jeff, Phil, Eric, and me, we've all drawn comics, we've all inked comics, and we've all written comics to some degree. So I think when you have 4 people that have told a story from nuts to bolt, or soup to nuts, whatever the saying is, whenever you have 4 people that have done the whole process, I think it becomes easier to trust your collaborators and to kind of let go of everything all the steps that come before you, and just embrace the step that you have. And this is probably the most fun I've had on a project maybe in my entire career. And it's because everything is laid out and set up for me to be successful at it. All I have to do is do what I was hired to do and do what I was brought on the book to do. So it's super fun, and it's not at all stressful. So it's super enjoyable.
It's funny that you mentioned that you've all done. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
I think we're after the same point. I think it's when everybody's done every aspect, we're always all checking each other, and we can always all help each other out. So like if I have to ink something, I can ink it. If Eric has to pencil a background, he can pencil it.
Yeah.
If Ryan has to redraw something on the fly, he can do that. Like we can all, we're like this Megazord. We can all like sort of switch spots on the.
That's exactly my point, because like I said, I didn't see individual credits, and so I went and looked at Ryan's art, and I was like, oh, he's done pencils, he's done inking, and I went to look at Eric, and I know Eric has done pencils and stuff like that, and we know Jeff has, and you have, Phil. So like for a second, I was like, is Phil only drawing this book, or is he having help from Ryan and Eric? And you're right, like it feels like a very collaborative project, like it's one new entity rather than all you guys working separately with each other. I did want to talk about Ryan, since you talk about, the process of having 4 different people. I feel like colorists, at least in the last like 5 to 7 years, had definitely become more public. Before they were kind of behind the scenes, and if you knew comics like really good, you could tell about colorists. But I think also like on the front cover, they recently, like in the last 7 years, they started getting credits on the front. And there are a lot of colorists that in this day and age, like we know them from being colorists. At least we do on this podcast. We talk about it all the time.
Right.
And since you've done all of these things, like, is there a certain process that you enjoy more, or is it just like, are you like kind of heading down the colorist route, or you're just like, hey, whatever the project brings me, like this is what I want to do?
Well, I mean, as someone whose career is essentially work for hire, I'm always, if a job comes available and they need me to draw it, then I'll draw it. But I would love to sort of focus mostly on coloring, and then if I'm going to draw something, it's going to be something I create, or it's going to be something that I'm passionate about, something I'm passionate about a project, so I want to do more than just color it.
Yeah.
Or it's personal to me or something like that. But at this point, I'm super happy being a colorist. And to your point, and to Phil's point that he mentioned about rendering in ink and stuff, I think the reason colorists are so high profile these days is that a lot of the rendering that used to be done in inks, because coloring couldn't handle the kind of, 30 years ago, you couldn't color. 25 years ago, you couldn't color like you color now.
Yeah.
So we now have a whole generation of artists, amazing artists, line artists who grew up being colored. They don't have to render everything in ink, because they know the colorist can essentially paint every panel and render every panel. I mean, 30 years ago, if you look at Marvel credits, the colorist was credited behind the letterer. Like, they were the last person before an editor. So coloring has come such a long way. But I agree with Phil. There's that sweet spot where a colorist needs to accentuate the line art that's already there and not kind of turn it into something brand new. And so I'm not interested in that kind of coloring. I'm not interested in this kind of modern superhero style of coloring, even though I like a lot of those colorists. It's not something that I'm interested in doing. But stuff like what I'm doing on Family Tree, or coloring over an artist like Becky Cloonan, or somebody who has everything fleshed out in black and white, that would be a joy to color, because at that point it's all fun. I'm not carrying nearly the weight of the whole look of the book, essentially.
Certainly the tone, though, like I mentioned, like I noticed the earthly tones with some of the stuff, and as you mentioned, like you light scenes differently depending on the setting of them. So it does add to the tone of each scene. Well, I think like we always try on the whenever I talk to people who don't read comics, and they ask me like, what do these kind of jobs do when they see that there's an artist and an inker and a colorist, I kind of try to relate it in movie terms so they can understand. Like there's a person who lights the scene, there's a person, director of photography, and then there's obviously a person who like is the scene, like they set up all the backgrounds and stuff like that. And for this, Phil, I know we had talked about before that you kind of don't like to, and I know actually from the University of Iowa video that you said that when you make characters, you don't like to have references, like you don't really reference, you just kind of, it's in your head and you spill it out. In this kind of way, like, do you guys kind of see yourselves in those roles, like setting the mood, setting the lighting and stuff like that? Or is it just, like you said, when you get it, Ryan, at that point, you're like, okay, what can I do to make this more?
I personally, I mean, I just think of myself as the second to last cog kind of in the production of this book. And I just don't want to be the weak link. Like that's especially on a book like this, where, like I said, everyone can do everything. I mean, even Steve, the designer, is amazing at what he does. So it's like, I don't want to be the weak link in the book. So that's my motivation every issue on this book. But yeah, I guess like being like a lighting designer is a way to think about it. Although Phil picks the light sources. So I have this great artist in front of me, telling me where shadows should be and where the light source should be. And I just, like I said, I just don't want to mess anything up. That's kind of how I think about it. I want everyone to be happy all the way through. I don't want it to stop with me. So.
Yeah. And I think because everybody on this team can do it all, I don't think anyone is sort of like boxing themselves in to say, I'm only thinking about this or I'm only thinking about that. Ideally, everybody on a comic book, on a collaborative comic book, everybody has storytelling at the forefront of their mind.
Yeah.
And, just depending on your role in this issue or whatever, you express that importance of storytelling in a different way. So because I'm the penciler, I think about it differently. Because Ryan's currently the colorist, he thinks about it differently. But we all know what each other is doing on this project, and we're all hip to like the requirements that we have to go through to affect storytelling, because that's our number one job, all of us.
So to that point of storytelling, and I'm sure this is probably more in Jeff's wheelhouse, but I'm like you said, it's collaborative, so you all have a perspective on this. Does this book, we talked about delivering comics in this day and age, Phil, on your panel, and is the monthly still a viable option? Is it the best for storytelling? It feels like, and I might be wrong, but it feels like you guys are writing for the kind of the arcs and trades. Like I said, the first 5, and then there's like a jump for is that how is that even a thought in your head, or are you just like, we're just telling the story?
I think it's in Jeff's mind, there are 3 big movements to this book. And in retrospect, after you read them, you can see them, but it's not necessarily how it's packaged and presented. Just for convenience sake, they're collected every 4 issues, like for the people that are just trade waiters. But in terms of Jeff's thinking, I know there are like 3 big waves of arcs, or 3 different themes that he likes, that he's pursuing, and how they unfold is sort of like up to the real estate we have in the comic book, like the actual pages we're allowed to use. You don't want to burn all your real estate in a flashback when you need to advance the story and things like that. That's all logistics that Jeff has to work out. But he definitely has like these 3 big movements in mind in terms of the book.
Do you have like a set page count, or can you go longer if you need to?
That's one of the beauties of Image, is that we're allowed to do whatever page count we want. And we've been as little as 20 and as high as 25. You don't know about that yet, Ryan? But there's a 25-page issue coming.
Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, we can, since it's our book, we get to choose the, page count, which is pretty cool.
And you mentioned that there's kind of like 3 waves to the overall story. And I believe you said we're kind of in the second one. We'll see the third one coming up here soon. So is there kind of like a set end in terms of issues, or are you just letting the story get to that, and however many issues it takes, that's whatever?
Yeah, it's sort of like the Royal City situation. Jeff, he calls shots. So like when he thinks the story has reached its natural end, that's when it'll end. At one point, I don't want to tell you guys, but at one point, while Jeff and I were kicking this back and forth, it was 50 issues. At one point, it was 36. At one point, it was 5.
Oh, wow.
And it's been 9. We've kicked it back and forth a lot, and it's largely down to Jeff's instincts. With, I think if anyone's been watching his career over the last 10 years, his instincts are pretty good.
Yeah.
So we're just sort of like playing it by ear. So when Jeff says we've hit it, then we've hit it.
So at this point, there's no, like, you said you were talking numbers before. At this point, you're just like, let's just go, and you know how the story's going to go, and just whenever we're close, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you'll know when it's time.
Okay. You know what? So you talk about that and Jeff's instincts on this, on just in general, especially how the last like 5-7 years have gone for Jeff. Like I don't. Does the guy sleep? You've talked to him, Phil and Ryan. Does he sleep ever? Because the dude's got like 16 books at a time.
Yeah, and he's running a TV show now too. He's a dynamo. He's really dedicated to his career, and he's got a really like good support system that lets him focus on work. And he's very disciplined and very talented too. So, and he's also done a really smart thing, which is surround himself with a support staff. Like Will Dennis and Steve Wands are on all his books. That's his editor and his designer / letterer. So those guys are his core. And then like people like Ryan and me and Eric come and go, like depending on the book. But if it's a creator-owned thing, he's got that support staff that's built in, so he knows how that runs. So like if there's a day-to-day problem with Family Tree, Will Dennis deals with it first before it gets kicked up to Jeff. So Jeff can devote more of his time to being creative, which is a really important thing because like, I don't know, like Ryan knows this, like from being a dad or being a house husband, like some days you lose a day to like, I don't know, fixing a lawnmower, and that doesn't happen to Jeff. Jeff is very disciplined about like if something like that comes up in his life, the professional handles it, but so he's definitely like very work oriented.
Well, even so much as like we were talking about before, like the business aspect of comics can suck up your life at the grind to like get it out there sometimes and get it going. And it takes away from your creative process. So that makes sense that he would have somebody to like kind of handle that while he works on the creative. So you had mentioned Eric, and he's the only piece of this story that we haven't heard has gotten involved. Obviously, you and Jeff had talked about this for a while, Phil, and then you said that Ryan, you're like, hey, you called Ryan and we're like, hey, that favor I owe you, let's get on this book and let's do this. Where does Eric come into this? Like, how did you guys get involved with Eric?
Well, it doesn't seem like it's possible, but like almost 10 years ago, Andy Parks, who was previously my main anchor, sort of did kind of a soft retirement from inking to focus on writing more. And it paid off. Like a lot of the stuff he's written is like really caught on. He's done a lot of really great work. And one of the things he wrote became like one of the big movies on Netflix last year in Extraction. But since he couldn't devote all his time to inking anymore, and I was splitting my time between writing and drawing, I still needed an inker. And I'm lucky that I met Eric when he was in college, and he was an aspiring comic strip artist. And he showed me his portfolio during a signing when I was in his town. And I really liked his work, and we started doing a few like little collaborations. And then just by sheer luck, he moved near me. Like he lives about half an hour away. And that just made it even more convenient for us to collaborate. So he sort of slid into Andy's role as my full-time inker.
So Garrett has some questions about the actual stories of Family Tree. I'm not sure how much you can divulge, but obviously we know how the overall plot's kind of laid out. Garrett said he's got some questions. Let's see what he's got.
Yeah, I mean, this would be the point in the interview where this would be like a flashing bulb, like spoiler warning, like turn away now. I'm gonna pull up this panel right here.
So actually, before you do that, then Garrett, if we're gonna do spoilers from this point out, I don't feel like Phil has told any kind of spoilers at this point. That if you're not into the book, that you wouldn't.
The end of the world bit. But.
That makes you more want to get it. But Family Tree is fantastic. It's at Image Comics. The first 2 trades are out, I believe, or the second one's coming soon.
The second one's about to drop. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is definitely a book, and we've said on the show before, like this is definitely a book that you should be into, and it's one of those things that is so unique right now. Like it doesn't feel like any other books like this, and it only feels more unique with all your guys' collaboration. Like I said, like every part of this book, is at a point that I can break it down and actually like look into it. That's where, we talked to Phil about the art before, and Ryan, your tones and your palette. Everything about this book, I feel like Jeff's been at this level on the show. We've called it the year of Jeff Lemire for the last 3 years. He's been, when we have awards at the end of the year, he's been our best writer for the last 3 years, just because of the amount of work the guy can't. Everything is at an A+, and every single book he brings, he knows who to bring with him, and they know who. Like, and the collaborative process is so great. And I feel like this book right now, if you want to get on a book that's like, this is what they're going to be talking about when it breaks big, right now is the time. It's the second trade's about to hit. So Garrett, like you said, spoilers all over the place. Let's go with these questions.
Spoiler. So this panel here, I just reread issue 8 before we did this, where sadly, sorry, horrible reflection, but Judd, kind of he loses the fight. Loses the fight is kind of metaphor, but like he finally kind of gives his last dying breath towards like getting his family to work together, and he loses like his connection to speak with Darcy via his wooden hand, which was an awesome touch, by the way. But that panel right there where Judd passes away, like I think that is like a perfect symbolism on how you all work together. I mean, the inks, like obviously making the tree and the blood under Judd's body, and then like the color saturation, like what a beautiful, beautiful image in that book. And like I see that, and you do that a billion more times in each issue. So like say that panel, for instance, Ryan, when you got that from Phil, like where would you even start to like be able to fill that in around all his sketching?
Well, yeah, Phil and Eric do a great job of doing some really great compositions and some great imagery, and that's just another example of it. But the way I think about this book, anytime, because underneath Judd there is all just white. It's just white. It's open line work. So anytime I see that on a page, I assume that they want me to just fill that with blood. So that's kind of the motif I'm going with. Like the cover to issue 8 is just like basically put as much blood on there as possible. Right. So that panel, it was there really wasn't a lot of thought that had to go into it, because I knew that it, that negative silhouette under there should be colored, blood red. It just makes sense. And I think comic book readers are savvy enough to understand imagery, and maybe that's not realistic and it wouldn't look like that in real life, but we're not doing that kind of book. This isn't that kind of book. So yeah, things like that, those are easy decisions to make, because it seems like it's written, seems like it's right out there for me to do. It's, it's understood pretty plainly.
Yeah. Right. And there is a decision there that Ryan has to make that I know I can trust him to make, because he does draw comics, which is, there's a point where the blood is like saturating the character, but the character's not solid red all the way through. So like Ryan's got to call those shots at like, where does the blood soaking into the overalls take over, and where does it start looking like natural overalls again? When I handed over that drawing, I don't make that decision. I just I stop rendering and let Ryan make those choices. And since Ryan can draw, I trust him to make those sort of decisions.
I mean, that's so cool, because this book, it is very violent, and even in the beginning of this issue where Judd takes the shot to the arm and there's blood splattering out, I'm the complexity of not only drawing but coloring those scenes. I'm how do you do it? I'm pretty sure. Gary, you can remind me because I have a horrible memory, but in the first issue when Judd shows up, I think he's introduced by shooting somebody's arm or head off with shotgun. Yeah. One of the cult leaders.
Yeah, that's right at the end. And Judd has been dying since issue 5.
Yeah, I noticed that too. He's been shot a lot.
You kind of give him hope though, maybe he'll live. It's maybe they'll heal from those.
I won't spoil it, but I will say it's not the last you see of it.
Ooh, that's good.
I actually have a question based off of your question, Garrett. Even Darcy and then Meg, as they transform into this tree, I noticed that we were talking about the weird before, Phil, right? That people try, when it gets into Hollywood's hands. They take out the weird and try to make it more appealing, we will say.
Yeah.
So I like that the characters, when they're transforming into these trees, it's not like you're making appealing people. Like they're more like the trees that are coming out of them. It doesn't look pleasant. I'll just say that. Like it doesn't look pleasant. Where you could have been like, there are some trees out there, or tree characters, I should say, that they try to make them like look human, but like, oh, you're like wooden. So I do like that you made them like, nah, this isn't nice. Like this, they're not liking this.
Yeah, it's supposed to look painful. It's supposed to look traumatic. Like, we don't want him to turn into baby Groots. We want
That's what I mean.
We want him to like look like they're getting stretched and pulled and they're becoming brittle, and that's not fun. And that's one thing we can say about the book. It's not, I mean, it's fun to read, but it's not we're not depicting fun experiences. I think maybe that's for people that aren't familiar with the book, if they just see the covers or whatever, what they're probably not prepared for is what Garrett mentioned, that it's like, it starts out as this kind of like Stranger Things family drama.
Yeah.
And then it turns into a John Woo shootout, for a good 5 or 6 issues. And then it turns into this David Cronenberg body horror thing. So you never get bored, because there's always going to be another left turn coming from this book.
Quite frankly, gross sometimes.
Yeah, like the energy is constant, because I'm doing the print here, and so I still get the good old page turn cliffhangers, like in this issue too. And Josh shoots that I don't know what the guy's name is, but the guy that's about to kill Loretta on the tree.
The arborist, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, there's so many things going on all at once. Yeah, the arborist, and I page flipped and I was like, okay, he's dead. Like that was insane. And like the ending of this issue, like talk about cliffhangers with everyone around them getting infected by, the spores of the tree and kind of turning into trees themselves. I'm like, without spoiling too much, is this going to be explained on how, is that like creating new family trees kind of sort of thing? Basically.
That's sort of like, we find that this is what the arborists were fighting against. They knew that this was coming. And largely because the lead arborist gives this speech where like, she knows about this because her father went through that change herself. Herself. And so she's like, she knows what this is about. But we've never seen it go its full extent, where like Meg grows and blooms and then spreads this sort of disease to everybody on Earth. And we're sort of seeing it, like we see it at the end of issue 8, where it starts to spread and we see it affect normal people. But what we see from issue 9 on is, we still jump back and forward in time, like we always have in this book. But from number 9 on, we're in this new status quo where that sort of contagion has spread all over the globe, and humans are very few and far between, and nature has reclaimed the earth.
Wow, that's so intense.
Going back to something we touched on earlier about this book is, like I said, I don't read the scripts. Obviously I signed on as soon as I was offered this book. I said yes without even reading. I didn't read a word of it just because of the creative team involved. But I remember like when it was first announced or whatever, I was thinking like, oh, this has all got to be like a metaphorical. She's not really turning into a tree. And it's not really like the title Family Tree kind of sounds like, if you just think of this book, it kind of sounds like a little dorky title, but like it can't be what they're trying to say it is. And then it turns out to be exactly what it said it was going to be. And it works. Yeah. And it works so beautifully, I think, because of Jeff and Phil, is everything is taken. It is treated so seriously that as soon as you can quickly get past the idea of, someone's turned into a tree and that's kind of weird. As soon as you get past that, it's more about the characters, and all that kind of fades away. And so this is a great example for me, for a learning experience for me, that if it's treated with respect and it's really well done, it's no different than someone flying around in a cape, and it can be as literal as they say it's going to be and still work beautifully.
I think the reason the book works is because Jeff created such a credible family to center the story about. It's a family that no matter what configuration your family takes, you either lived in a family like Meg's or know a family like Meg's. And so you can identify with that family right away.
Or even so much as like the characters themselves, like you can identify with somebody on that family and how they feel within that family. Just going off of what Ryan said, Phil, about 2 years ago, you had mentioned this was on the horizon and that you and Jeff were working to get this kind of going. And at the time, I had the same thought. I was like, okay, this must be like Royal City and like it's going to be about a family. And then when the solicit came out on the show, usually we talk about the books that are coming out. I remember we read it, and I remember reading that about people turning to trees. I think our reaction was like, well, I mean, we know Phil and Jeff could do good work, so I guess let's get it. But it was like, what is this? And then when you read it, it's the third time you're like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. She actually is turning into a tree. I thought the same thing, right? I thought it was gonna be like this out of body where she's like going back in her family history to the family tree or something like that.
Right.
And no.
Or maybe she's connected to the green. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
Yeah, right. Swamp Thing makes cameo.
In a way, she is, but it gets even weirder. It keeps getting weird. Okay.
I hope so.
It keeps
It's
getting
good.
weird.
It's a good thing to have.
But like I said, that I don't know if I said it in our other interview, but the general message is that there's like if your family bonds are strong enough, they can persevere through all these changes. And if you trust the people in your family to always support you, those bonds like persist past catastrophe, and as we'll see in the next arc, they persist past death. So that's sort of the general theme of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it is truly just so much fun to read, and I like that, like, we're kind of in the same perspective as Josh and the family. Like, he's kind of learning.
Yeah.
What?
Everybody's Josh.
Yeah, right. And even at the end when he's like, holy fuck, I'm like, oh, God. Like, I was feeling the same way, and then he just read my mind, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, I think even
Josh is our lens.
I think down to a T, like, Jeff would be Josh's age. Like, I think Jeff was like in high school at the time we set this book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think Jeff's exactly 10 years younger than I am. So like I was graduating high school in the late 80s. He was graduating in the late 90s, and that's when the book is set. Well, at least the first few arcs are set in the late.
Yeah,
90s.
right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have more questions, Garrett?
I mean, obviously, I don't think I do, because, I got to see what's going to happen next. I can only imagine maybe is there going to be, speaking of time, again, I don't know how much you can tell, will there be another time jump, basically? I mean, seeing the cover for issue 9 with Josh looks a little older on it, I'm assuming, yes.
Yeah.
So,
you get to see, I don't want to spoil anything. There's a big zing, well, like Ryan said, there's a big zinger at the end of number 9.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say the book lives up to its title throughout that next arc. Yeah, definitely.
Which, if you're listening to this is going to be out there for you guys to watch during the first week of October. That issue comes out the 21st of October. You got a little bit to catch up on this book and see those two zingers, as you put it, at the end of that book, and get on board with this thing.
And one thing that doesn't change about the book is it remains violent throughout.
yeah.
There's a lot of bloody struggle throughout.
Speaking of which, so what, like, the violence of this book, is that part of what you said, Phil, like the perseverance of family through anything? Was it intentional to be that violent, to be like, look how much is going on right now, and there's still like the family has to be stronger than this?
Yeah, I think so. But also it's a way of reflecting what Meg is going through too. Like, Meg's got her own like violent struggle that she's going through, and like the transformation of her body. And that's being reflected in what the family's going through while trying to first cure her and then preserve her. So it's just sort of like a further amplification of that theme. Like, she's going through this violent transformation. The family's going through a violent transformation. And by the third arc, humanity is going through a violent transformation.
Anybody that's listening to this, like I had mentioned before, like I like to make movie kind of comparisons. Peck and Paw. Like if you ever seen a Peck and Paw action movie, how bloody and not clean the violence is. That's what this reminds me of. Especially, like I said, the introduction to Judd is kind of just like it's out there. Like when you see it, there's no holding back on that violence, and I like that about it. Like, not that I'm a guy that like I don't like to see things that are ultra violent, but that's a realistic kind of violent that I feel like kind of grounds the books along with the family drama. That like this isn't out of the question that this could happen to somebody. Like this is even though the concept of them turning to trees is out there, what they go through is not.
Right. And like I think we wanted to be very, very conscious about like this isn't like the violence we're depicting isn't sort of like widescreen Jeff Darrow kind of violence where you kind of like get in and like kind of marvel at the details. It should look and feel miserable, you know, like it should look painful and it should look like no fun for anybody. And because I don't know if you've ever had a violent encounter in your life, but it is not fun. Like even if you come out on top, it's not fun. It sucks. And we want this violence to be scary and painful looking.
Even so much so that like I had mentioned, Darcy has the trees initially when he shows Judd coming out of his stomach. Like when I saw that, it just makes you think being like, yeah, how much would that hurt? Especially the stomach. I mean, grow my arms first or something, my legs, but right out of the stomach, like, like I feel like, yeah, it definitely was a choice to make, like you said, not to kind of glorify them turning into trees. It's more like this is not nice. Like he doesn't also get a tree hand and also now he's half tree and half human. Like it's going for the stomach and it's in a place where I'm surprised he's wearing that t-shirt. Like he's got to get new clothes, everything.
Yeah.
Hey, John McClane never gets a new shirt, so why would he?
I think there's another allegory to make to cancer also in this storyline, because like cancer can take over your life that same way and like disfigure you that same way and sort of drag you into like a world of misery and death. And it's about the strength of your family to see you through that sort of thing too. So there's this, like I said, we didn't want to make it seem like it was cool to turn into a tree.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't an escape. It was like it's closer to a martyrdom than it is to an escape. Like, so she's not doing an Alice in Wonderland, you know, she's being martyred. And so it's a traumatic event. And, but I think throughout the whole thing, as miserable and as like bloody and painful as it looks, there's still this like human center to the book that's based on the love that the family has for each other. And it's expressed in different ways. You know, like Judd expresses it, you know, through his violence, and you get to see Josh kind of grow into it, because like in the first issue, he's clearly annoyed by his sister. But as the series goes on, you see he's clearly willing to do whatever it takes to protect her.
Well, I think also you'd see that when they plant her, right, and she turns into the tree, like that moment in the comic is very heartbreaking. Like you said, doesn't look like it's fun, this process, but also for the family dynamic to lose somebody in that way, to go through all this and then having to say, you know, goodbye, and you're never going to be the person I knew who you were before. I think even us as readers, when we read that, it's kind of like, you don't expect a book to be that difficult to read. Like, obviously things are entertainment, but this is also another aspect of it, Phil, like we were talking about, the human connection to these characters can be very rewarding, but you have to make it real. Like, I'm not going to connect with these characters unless I feel like there's something there.
I think that's go ahead, Ryan.
Sorry, Phil. Yeah, one thing that I really noticed when the book first came out, I'm not above looking at reviews, especially to see if my name's mentioned. And a lot of, like, not a lot, but a couple of reviewers would come out and be like, you know, they're not quite sure, because that first issue, you're not quite sure what's really going on at the end of that. And some reviewers were saying, like, the mother character, Loretta, they just found her to be like unlikable and just like, you know, no like kind of bitchy or whatever. And my immediate thought is, these reviewers are not parents, because they've never worked to they're so tired and then go home and have their kids give them constant crap, and they've never had that sense of like worn out of constantly being worried every second of every day, because that's what kids are, especially when you're a working family and you have kids. It's constant stress every waking minute. And so to me, she read as a totally relatable character, you know. Yeah. And so the people that like kind of had like, we're not getting this character, and my first thought is like, oh, they don't have kids. Like they're just probably like straight out of like school and they're just writing comic book reviews. Like,
and it's to the same point, Ryan. It's like, it's not that Loretta doesn't care about those kids. You clearly see that through these arcs. It's just that like as a parent, like as I'm a parent and Alex is a parent, there's just some days it's just like, no, like you have to kind of weigh your own life and then other lives in your family. And so for Loretta in that point, like at the end, not at the end, but like when Meg is gone to be in a full tree, I feel like that moment is kind of Loretta being like, can we just go back to like me going out of my mind with my kids in the house? Like now we're at a point where she's looking back being like, I don't want to be here. Like, yes, like it's not like she didn't love Meg and like wants to get rid of Meg and wish she didn't have kids. It's just that like when they get there and Meg is totally gone to being a tree, it's heartbreaking because they're kids. Like like they're always gonna be. I was a headache for my parents. Kids are always gonna be headaches for your parents. But to see the love that this family has when they're put in these situations, as you said, Phil, like I think that really shines in this book and what makes it very appealing to everybody.
Yeah, I knew I was gonna be down for this project no matter what Jeff wanted to do, but the moment I really got this book was when he wrote Darcy's death scene in number 2. And that's the moment I was like, I've only known this character for like 6 pages. And still, when he dies, it's really like moving. Like, because of the way Jeff is so adept at like finding his way into characters and finding his way into like really moving moments. Just the dialogue he wrote in that scene is like devastating. And I knew if he brings that same sort of care to every one of these things where characters go through these like really like huge transformations that could really fall flat. Like if it was like in a Hollywood movie, or it would just be like totally cliched. But since Jeff grounded these characters with such realistic dialogue and realistic concerns, that when they do that stuff, it counts. Like you feel it.
And I think to that same point, I'm glad that you brought that up, because we say all the time, I think what we love about Jeff's writing, and especially now the storytelling that you're all doing on this book, is that he is great at not, I feel like some comics just like put out dialogue or like the characters talk and there's like scenes, but there's no moments, right? And the moments are what fills life. Like when we have a conversation, like and especially he did this a lot in Royal City, and I see it in Family Tree too. Like there's a lot of just moments of the comic just being like silent panels or people reacting to what people were saying. And it does add to that. Like it really does add to these characters being fully realized, and you not only feeling for them, but you can relate more to them because you're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And so like his characters do feel flawed, and you're going through this journey with some flawed characters who might as well be you.
Yeah, and I have to say that as a creator, I feel like I've learned a lot from this book, just working from Jeff's scripts, in terms of Ryan knows this too. Like when you're working in comics, you're always thinking about economy, like how much real estate you have to tell your story, and you're thinking, well, I can expand this scene. I've got to chop this scene down, whatever. And initially when I was reading Jeff's scripts for this book, I thought, man, this scene is treading water. Like I would never waste this much time on this scene. Like I would cut to the bad guy doing this or whatever here. I wouldn't like have them riding in a car looking at each other for 2 pages. But you needed those characters riding in a car, like not fully reaching each other for 2 pages, to make what happens to them 3 issues later matter. Mm-hmm. That kind of eating your vegetables is something that, like, as a storyteller, I don't necessarily always have the right discipline to do. And I think I've learned that from working on this book. I think drawing this book has made me a better writer.
It's great that you say that. And I think, like, I even think as a reader, reading Jeff's stuff has made me appreciate what a story like is supposed to be telling me. Like, I feel like a lot of times you can get caught up in the superheroes with the capes, and it's a lot of like, here's the plot and here's an action scene and adios. But it's very hard to have those human moments and make them count. Like, not only have a human moment like that, like in Royal City, for instance, we always bring up this scene where, the main character, his brother drowned, and there's a scene where the mother, I believe it's the mother, is in a church, or actually, I think it's the whole family, and the brother's above them, and the water's just dripping on them like it's raining. And it's just a panel just for you to reflect and being like, this whole family has been destroyed by this event, and they just continue allowing this event to rain on them and bring them to this place. And I think, especially in Family Tree, like, those moments are what makes this comic. Like, those moments are the reason I read this comic.
I will say that Royal City is my favorite Jeff thing. So this sort of feels like Royal City, but like turned to 11. So it's like the same sort of relationships and emotional resonance of Royal City, but like a story that, like, if comic book readers are accustomed to a certain kind of storytelling, and that involves like people turning to trees, apocalyptic cults, shootouts, chases through the jungle, things like that. So it's sort of like Royal City, but with the trappings of this sort of like traditional comic book adventure taking place around it. So if you are a fan of that book or that style of Jeff's writing, that's still at the core of this kind of book.
And like, you definitely need that kind of basis of that human element. Otherwise, like you said, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't feel like it matters. Like, when you see Judd get killed, like any other comic, if there weren't those moments, then you're just like, okay, well, this is the plot point to bring on. But no, he's a real person. If you, at this point when you're reading, you're like, you feel bad for him not being there anymore.
It's sort of like when a character dies in Walking Dead. It's like, you're like, oh, I didn't think that was going to affect me. But it does, because you've done a bunch of boring stuff with that character for 30 issues. You've watched him, like, fetch water or fix wagon wheels or whatever. So you live with them. And then when they finally do die, it has resonance with you.
Which, actually, you brought up Jaws during our interview, and I want to talk about, there is a scene in Jaws that I love, and I kind of look towards to being like my storytelling, like, North Star. And there's a scene right before they go out to go fight this shark, and there's Roy sitting eating dinner with his son, and it's just a dinner scene. They're literally just eating dinner. Like, there's nothing about the shark, it's nothing about anything, but they just have dinner and him interacting with his family before he goes out there, which is really important, because then you see what he has to lose by going out there and has to fight this monstrosity, and what he is trying to get back to, what he's trying to save. In the same way in this book, like you said, when they're in that car and you have that kind of moment where they can kind of live with each other, it's so that when you get to the points of all this blood and violence, you're like, don't die. Like, I don't want you to, like, you have stuff that you can lose, and I don't want it to happen.
So true.
Yeah. Phil should win an Emmy for drawing gnarly old men and exhausted looking mothers.
I wish, like, my other longer assignment I had right before this one was Batman Beyond. So I got to draw like old Bruce Wayne too. So like, I was like, I only want to draw old man comics from now on. Fun.
A lot of lines in those faces, Phil, with those old men.
I love drawing that. Like, I'm still mad that Marvel's doing that Maestro comic and I'm not involved with it. Old Hulk? Oh, man.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe they'll, like, make another old man book, and you can go do that one. Old man, who now? Captain America? Oh, no, they've done that already. Never mind.
Yeah, they've done that too. They're running out of old men to do.
I think we're at time, but I just wanted to say before we go, first, thank you for joining us, Ryan and Phil. Give our greetings to Jeff and Eric. Lovely book. We love it so much on the show, but also at SiouxperCon, like, if you're watching this and you're not on Family Tree, like, there's not a book we would recommend more on our show. Like I said, not only has Jeff been on this roll for like 3 years of like, here's 10 books that are classics for this year. And it's like, Jeff, leave some for some other people. Like they got to write some ideas too. But the guy is putting out constant work. And then we get to this book. And I think during this panel, you've kind of nailed it. Not only does it have things that are exciting to see in a story with the tree, with the sci-fi kind of elements and the violence, but it's not nice to see, but that family element is what makes you care about these books. So if you want a book that is character driven but it has enough twists and has a very intriguing plot, like this is absolutely the book to be on right now. And we can't, like I told you, I'm waiting on the next one. Like this thing has got to come out. Hopefully, I know you got an end, but hopefully that's not like 20 issues or 15 issues, like not soon. Maybe. I don't know. Don't tell me.
Don't say the end.
I don't want to spoil anything, but like if you've been waiting to get on this book, don't wait. There's some news coming. There's some news coming down the pipe.
Ooh.
You know what? Actually, I say that like I don't want it to end, but we always say in the show, like when Royal City ended, if it's got to end, it's got to end. We'd rather have a story that we love and can look back on than a story that's gone 50 issues too long, or not 50, even 10 too long is too much sometimes. And I love that you guys have iterated. The reason why this book works is because you guys are focused on the story, and wherever that takes you, that's what you're going to do. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ryan. I've been Marvin. Garrett to my left and Alex to my right. SiouxperCon 2020. Stay tuned for more panels as we get on with the day.